My name is James. I'm 28 and I make my home in Cedar Creek, a quiet town nestled just beyond the sprawl of Seattle. Life here moves at a slower pace. I rent a simple one-bedroom apartment over a quiet bookstore, and my days are spent as an HVAC technician, wrestling with furnaces, air conditioners, and the occasional labyrinth of ductwork. It's not a line of work that earns you applause, but it's honest, keeps my bills paid, and my body in motion. I've always been a man of few words, preferring observation to participation. I've never been in what you'd call a real relationship either. I suppose I always held a quiet belief that it would simply fall into place one day, but that day had a habit of never quite arriving. Most of my mornings were governed by a routine as solid as concrete. I make a stop at a small coffee house, the Daily Grind, just a few blocks from my first job of the day, order a large black coffee, and then head out. The same time, the same order, a predictable start to an unpredictable day. And every single morning, the same person stood behind the counter. Her name was Emma, and she looked to be a few years older than me. She had fiery red hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, and a sleeve of intricate black and gray botanicals, vines, and ferns coiling around her arm. She always dressed in soft, earthy colors, and her smiles were rare commodities reserved only for moments of genuine amusement. There was nothing artificial about her kindness. She was simply real, a dry, effortless wit laced her tone, catching people off guard and making them laugh. But my interactions with her were minimal. A script of no more than a few words. Large black, please. Thank you. That was the extent of it in her world. I was sure I was just another face in the morning rush, a nameless order. Then one Tuesday evening, everything shifted. It was late, close to 9 p.m., and I was wrapping up an emergency furnace repair not far from the cafe. A cold autumn rain was coming down in sheets, turning the streets into slick black mirrors. As I packed my tools into my van, I saw her across the street in the Daily Grind's nearly empty parking lot. Emma. The hood of her old seafoam green station wagon was up, and even from a distance, I could read the exhaustion and frustration in her posture as she stood in the downpour, illuminated by the lonely glow of the lost single lamp. My first instinct was to just drive away, to not get involved. I was a stranger to her, a quiet black man approaching a white woman alone in a dark, wet parking lot. The world had taught me all the ways that scenario could be misinterpreted, but I couldn't shake the image of her looking so stranded. After a moment of internal debate, I took a deep breath, pulled up the hood of my jacket, and crossed the street. She looked up as I approached, her body tensing, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes. Car trouble? I asked, keeping a respectful distance. She nodded, wiping rain from her face with the back of her hand. It just won't turn over. I think the battery is dead. I glanced at the engine, a chaotic tangle of wires and hoses. I'm an HVAC tech, but I know my way around an engine. Do you mind if I take a look? She hesitated, her gaze darting from me to my van and back again. I could feel her weighing the risks. I understood it completely, so I gave her an out. Look, I get it. This is weird. I'm basically a stranger. Is this a bad idea? I asked, my voice low and steady. She held my gaze for a long moment, the rain dripping from her hair. A slow, tired smile touched her lips, the first genuine one I'd ever received from her. Let's find out, she said. That was all the permission I needed. It turned out to be a simple fix, a corroded battery terminal that just needed a good cleaning. Within 10 minutes, I had the engine rumbling back to life. She leaned against the fender, relief washing over her face. Thank you, she said, her voice filled with a gratitude that felt profound. I don't know what I would have done. I was on my way to pick up my son. She told me her name was Emma and I told her mine was James. The conversation was brief, but it felt more significant than all our previous months of morning pleasantries combined. As I walked back to my van, she called out, "Hey, James, I owe you a coffee. A free one this time." I just smiled and waved, the sound of her car driving away a counterpoint to the rhythm of the rain. That night, something had been sparked, not just in her car's engine, but between us. For the rest of that week, I was a mess. Every time I thought about walking into the daily grind, a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. My hands would feel clumsy. My voice would get stuck in my throat. And Emma, well, she didn't exactly make it easy on me. She started treating me like an actual person, a friend. The formal barrier between us had been demolished that rainy night in the parking lot. "Hey, hero." She greeted me with a wry grin when I came in, my usual awkward silence now feeling even more pronounced. I'd manage a small smile back. Some days I'd come up with a quick mumbled reply. On other days I'd just stand there, looking at her as if I'd completely forgotten why I'd come in the first place. But gradually, with painstaking slowness, I found my courage. I began to respond with more than just a simple thank you. One afternoon, I saw her meticulously wiping down the espresso machine and asked, "Do you ever just get tired of the smell of coffee?" She glanced up, a rag in her hand. "Oh, constantly. But I've also got a 7-year-old who thinks he's a paleontologist and requires a steady supply of dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. So, I persevere." I was quiet for a beat processing this new piece of information. "You have a kid?" She nodded, her expression unwavering. "Yep, Noah. He's in 2nd grade. He's obsessed with asteroids and thinks socks are optional. What about you? Got a secret family stashed away somewhere?" I let out a genuine laugh. "No, just me. I never quite got around to the whole family building thing." She gave me a thoughtful look. "There's still time," she said simply. Her words echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. Over the following weeks, this became our new normal. I'd stop in for my coffee and we'd fall into easy conversations about everything and nothing. We talked about her favorite authors, my strangest service calls, and the time in college she impulsively dyed her hair bright blue and immediately regretted it. She shared stories with a casual vulnerability as if she was unconcerned with judgment. The more I listened, the more I began to perceive a certain weight she carried. She never spoke of it directly, but I could see it in the shadows of her eyes when she mentioned her ex-husband. I could hear it in the careful pauses that punctuated her sentences. She wasn't broken, not at all, but she was weary. I never made the mistake of trying to fix her. I wasn't her savior. I just kept showing up. I started leaving her little notes on napkins, silly observations, or bad jokes. "Today's forecast, 95% chance of rain, 100% chance of me needing this coffee." She would roll her eyes dramatically, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch into a smile when she thought I wasn't looking. Then one Friday evening, the routine changed again. The sun had already set and I was walking home after a long day when I passed the cafe and saw her inside locking the front door. I hesitated on the sidewalk, then took a breath and crossed the street. "Emma," I said. She turned, a hint of surprise on her face. "James, you're out past your bedtime." I smiled. "Just finished up a late call." She jingled her keys in her hand, not making a move toward her car. "Do you want to walk for a bit?" she asked, her voice softer than usual. "I don't really feel like going straight home yet." I didn't need to think about it. Yeah, I'd like that." We walked in comfortable silence at first, the only sounds being the soft scuff of her boots and my sneakers against the pavement. After a few blocks, she gestured toward a house that still had its holiday lights blinking in mid-April. "Some people have a hard time letting go," she murmured. I glanced at her profile, catching the faint glint of a street light in her eye. I wondered if she was talking about more than just decorations. "Do you miss him?" I asked, my voice gentle. She didn't reply immediately. "I miss the person I thought he was," she said finally. "The idea of him, not the man he turned out to be." We continued walking until we came to a small neighborhood park with a weathered wooden bench beneath a solitary lamppost. She sat down and I joined her, leaving a small, respectful space between us. She pulled a small thermos from her tote bag. "Want some tea? It's probably only lukewarm by now." I nodded. "I don't mind." We drank in silence, listening to the rustle of the wind in the trees. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she said, "You're different." "Different in what way?" I asked. "You're not trying to get anything from me," she explained. "You're just here." I don't think I've ever really had that before. My heart started to pound in my chest, a heavy, frantic rhythm. This wasn't a cinematic, swelling music moment. It felt more like my body was bracing for impact, knowing I was about to do something audacious. I turned to face her fully. She didn't look away, and before my rational mind could intervene, I heard myself say, "I have another potentially bad idea." There was a beat of silence, maybe half a second long. Then she gave that same small, real smile from the parking lot. She leaned in just a fraction, not closing the distance entirely, but enough for me to feel the warmth of her breath. "Find out," she whispered. So I did. There were no fireworks, no sudden crescendo of an orchestra. It wasn't like the movies. It was real. Her lips were soft, yet there was a deep-seated sadness in the way she kissed me. A hesitance as if she'd been down this road before and wasn't sure she wanted to unlock that gate again. When we drew apart, she just looked at me for a long time, her eyes searching mine. I had no idea what to say, so I just stared back, my heart thudding. Finally, she broke the silence. "I haven't done that in a long time." "Me neither," I admitted, my voice hoarse. She stood up abruptly. "I should get home to Noah." I nodded, my mind reeling. We didn't hug. We didn't make any promises for the future. She just offered me a tired but warm smile and walked away into the darkness. I remained on that bench long after she was gone, trying to process what had just occurred, wondering if it meant anything at all, wondering if I had just made the biggest misstep or the most important decision of my life. The morning after that kiss, I woke up long before my alarm, a strange lightness in my chest, where a familiar weight used to be. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I actually felt an eagerness to start the day. I took my time in the shower, shaved carefully, and chose the least wrinkled shirt from my closet. At precisely 8:45 a.m., I walked into the daily grind. Emma was there behind the counter, just as she always was. But the atmosphere was wrong. She didn't greet me with our new familiar banter. There was no wry nickname, no small smile, just a fleeting guarded glance in my direction. Morning, I started pausing. Just a large black. She nodded stiffly, turned to pour the coffee without a word. The easy space we had built between us was gone, replaced by a thick, uncomfortable silence. When she handed me the cup, our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. Felt like an electric shock. She pulled her hand back instantly and turned to help the next person in line. I stood there for a moment, a foolish hope flickering that she might look back. She didn't. I walked out, the coffee cup feeling heavy in my hand, my heart sinking like a stone in my chest. Throughout the day, my mind raced, trying to invent excuses for her behavior. Maybe she was just exhausted. Maybe her son, Noah, had kept her up all night. Maybe she hadn't slept well. But by the time I was on my lunch break, a colder, more painful truth began to settle in. She regretted it. I fought against the thought that kiss had felt so real, so honest. It hadn't been about lust or confusion. It was something genuine. I was so sure she had felt it too. But the look in her eyes that morning hadn't been one of someone floating on a new feeling. It was the look of someone meticulously rebuilding a wall. I gave it a day then too. My phone remained silent. There were no notes left on my van. No invitations for lukewarm tea in the park. By the third day, the suspense was unbearable. It was a Thursday night, and I knew her shift ended around 7 o'clock. I walked to the cafe just before closing time, my heart hammering against my ribs. I stood outside for a full minute, gathering my nerve, then pushed the door open. Only a couple of customers were left. She saw me, and for a split second, her expression tightened with what looked like surprise before it went completely blank. "Hey," I said, approaching the counter. "Can we talk for a minute?" She hesitated, wiping down the counter. "I'm closing in 5. "I can wait," I replied. I took a seat at a small table by the window, my stomach twisting into a painful knot with every tick of the wall clock. At 6 minutes past 7, she slid into the chair across from me. Her arms were crossed over her chest and her eyes looked shadowed with fatigue. She didn't speak, leaving the opening for me. "Did I do something wrong?" I asked directly. She blinked as if surprised by the question. "No, James, you didn't do anything wrong." "Then why are you avoiding me?" She let out a slow breath through her nose and stared down at the tabletop. I'm not avoiding you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm protecting myself. I frowned, confused. Protecting yourself from me? She finally looked up and shook her head. No. From what this could become. There was a long, heavy pause. I liked the kiss, she admitted at last. Probably more than I should have, and that terrifies me. Why? Because my life is already a tangled mess. James, I have a son. I have an ex-husband who has suddenly decided he wants to play the role of a father again after years of being a ghost. I don't have the space in my life for feelings that are strong enough to make me lose sleep. My gaze dropped to my hands. Every single word I had rehearsed on the walk over now sounded hollow and useless. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. When I said, "You're different," that's part of the problem. I'm not asking for anything complicated. I said, my voice quiet. I like being around you. That's exactly why I'm scared, she whispered. The silence that fell between us wasn't angry or cold. It was just heavy, weighted with all the things we both wanted to say, but knew wouldn't solve anything in that moment. I nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Okay, she repeated, looking surprised. You're not going to argue? I've never been good at arguing, I said, especially not when I can see that someone is hurting. A sad smile touched her lips. You're a good man, James. I pushed my chair back and stood up. Yeah, well, that seems to be my brand. She stood as well. Take care of yourself. You too. I gave her a small final nod and turned to walk away. Just before I reached the door, she called out my name softly. Wait. I looked back over my shoulder. I'm not saying never, she said, her voice fragile. I'm just saying not now. I nodded again, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out into the cool night air. That night, sleep eluded me again, but it was a different kind of sleeplessness. It wasn't the sharp pain of heartbreak. It was a hollow feeling of confusion, of emptiness. I didn't feel rejected, not exactly. I felt paused, as if life had started writing a new chapter but had left the rest of the page completely blank. In the days that followed, I stayed away from the daily grind. It wasn't because I was angry or because I didn't want to see her. It was because I respected what she had asked for. Not now meant she needed space, and the last thing I wanted to be was another man who trampled over her boundaries. I still thought of her every single morning. I glanced at the clock at 8:47, the time I used to go for coffee out of sheer habit. I still wondered if she ever thought about me, too. One night, I typed out a long message on my phone, pouring out everything I felt. I'm still here if you ever change your mind. I'm not going anywhere. I read the words over and over, every one of them true. Then I saved the message as a draft and closed my phone. Sometimes the most difficult part of love isn't the ending. It's the waiting. It had been 26 days since I had last seen Emma. I wasn't keeping a deliberate count, but my body remembered. Every morning, my eyes would find the clock at 8:47 without any conscious effort. Every time my work van took me past the street with the coffee shop, my gaze would automatically flick toward the front window. Even as I forced myself to keep driving, I had honored my silent promise. I had given her space. No texts, no calls, no accidental run-ins. While she was a constant presence in my thoughts, it wasn't just the memory of the kiss. It was everything. The specific way she would stir her tea exactly twice before taking a sip. The way her nose would crinkle slightly when she was concentrating. The way she smiled as if she didn't quite trust happiness enough to let it linger. I missed her presence. But what I missed even more was the feeling of being seen. Truly seen by someone who didn't want me to be anything other than who I was. Then, on a Wednesday evening, the stillness broke. I arrived home from work around 6:30, dropped my tool bag by the door, and threw together some uninspired pasta. I was slumped on the couch, half watching a nature documentary, when I heard a soft clink from just outside my apartment door. I paused the TV, listened, and then cautiously got up to look. The hallway was empty, but there on my doormat sat a small metal object, a brand new battery terminal clamp, the kind I had used on her car. Tucked into it was a neatly folded napkin. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up. Written in familiar blue ink were just a few words. I thought you might need this. Our bench. Sunday at 6 p.m. There was no name, no number, but I didn't need either. My heart gave a powerful leap. I hadn't realized how much weight I had been carrying on my shoulders until that exact moment when it felt like it had finally started to lift. The next few days were an exercise in torture. I tried to act normal at work, but my focus was shot. I dropped a heavy-duty wrench on my foot, mixed up the addresses for 2 different service calls, and my boss caught me staring out the window of the break room like the lead in some melancholy indie film. By the time Sunday finally arrived, I was a bundle of raw nerves. I got to the park 20 minutes early. Our bench sat under a large maple tree, its frame slightly tilted from years of exposure to the elements with flakes of green paint peeling along the edges. I sat down, shoved my hands in my pockets, and my leg immediately started bouncing with anxiety. 6 o'clock came and went. Then 6:02, 6:05. I coached myself to stay calm. Maybe she was looking for parking. Maybe she got held up. Then I heard the crunch of footsteps on the gravel path. I turned my head and there she was, Emma. Her red hair was pulled back. She wore no makeup, just an old comfortable-looking hoodie and jeans. She was carrying a small thermos and a little paper bag. She looked exactly as I remembered her and yet somehow completely new. She walked over and sat down beside me without a word, then held out the thermos. I brought tea, she said. It's probably lukewarm again. I don't mind, I replied, taking the cup she offered. I took a sip. It was perfect. For a long minute we just sat there, the silence stretching between us, but this time it felt like a warm blanket, not a stone wall. Finally, she broke it. I almost didn't come. I looked over at her. Why did you? She let out a long, slow sigh. Because I couldn't stop thinking about that night. The kiss? I asked. She shook her head. No, what you said afterward. What did I say? You said you just like being around me. That was it. No strings, no pressure. I nodded, remembering. She looked out toward the street. I've had so many people in my life try to fix me or treat me like I'm some project they need to rescue. You never did that. You just listen. That's all I ever wanted to do. I said honestly. She turned back to me. My ex came back. Not for me, for Noah. He wants weekend visitations now. He claims he's sober this time, that he's really trying. I remained quiet, letting her speak. And then you showed up, she continued, and you made me feel something real, and it terrified me. I exhaled slowly. Emma, the last thing I ever wanted was to complicate your life. I know, she said, and that's what made you so different. Another comfortable silence settled. She reached into the paper bag and pulled out the slightly misshapen store-bought cookies. She handed one to me. We ate them without speaking. Chocolate chip, a little stale but still good. Then she asked, "Do you still think about that night all the time?" I admitted without hesitation. She held my gaze. And if I told you that I'm still not ready for something serious, but that I wanted to try starting over, just a little slower this time, would that be okay with you? I turned to her fully. Are we talking coffee shop slow or park bench slow? A genuine laugh escaped her, bright and clear. Somewhere in between, she said. I nodded. Yeah, that's more than okay. We sat on that bench until the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. We weren't the people rushing headlong into something. We were the people making a quiet mutual agreement. This matters. When we finally stood up to leave, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me and said, I'll see you tomorrow. Same time? I asked. Same time, she confirmed. She walked toward her car and I stayed for a minute longer, finishing the last of the tea and looking at the now empty bench. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel stuck or paused. I felt like we were finally moving forward slowly, honestly, and together. It has been 10 months since that evening on the park bench. I can recall every detail of it with perfect clarity. The sound of her voice, her hands wrapped around that thermos of lukewarm tea, the look in her eyes when she said somewhere in between. That moment wasn't a grand, dramatic confession of love. It was quieter and more profound. It was permission to begin again. And we didn't rush. That was the most important part. There were no sweeping declarations, no suffocating pressure. We just let it be. We started texting, then calling. I began visiting the coffee shop again, but not with the rigid routine of before. Maybe 2 or 3 times a week. Sometimes I'd leave her a silly note. Sometimes she'd slip me a day-old scone when her manager wasn't looking. In early April, I finally met Noah. He was exactly as she had described him. A tiny hurricane of energy, a whirlwind of limbs, dinosaur facts, and very strong opinions about everything. I was terrified, but Emma made it feel easy and natural. I never tried to be a second father. I was just James, the guy who fixed the broken toaster and happened to know how to build impressively complex Lego spaceships. We started weaving our lives together in small, simple ways, picnics in the park, wandering through the farmer's market on Saturday mornings, movie nights on her couch. The three of us would share a giant bowl of popcorn while Noah inevitably fell asleep. Halfway through the film and in the quiet that followed, Emma and I would just sit together, comfortable and content to need words. We avoided the word relationship for a long time. Not because what we had wasn't one, but because giving it a name too early felt like it would make it fragile, like something we could shatter just by speaking it aloud. She still had her hard days. There were times she would retreat into herself, going quiet for hours. I came over once and found her sitting on the cool tile of her bathroom floor, clutching a framed photo of Noah as a baby. She didn't say much, just a quiet. I really thought my life was going to be so different. I didn't try to fix her pain or offer empty platitudes. I just sat down on the floor beside her until she leaned her head against my shoulder and whispered, "You make it easier to breathe." That was the night I knew with absolute certainty that I was in love with her. It was not the dizzying dramatic love of movies, but the quiet earned kind that doesn't need to shout because it shows up day after day. In July, the company I worked for went through a round of layoffs. Business had slowed, and as one of the newer hires, I was let go. The blow was more than just financial. It hit my pride hard. I felt small and useless, like I suddenly had nothing to offer her. I stopped texting for 2 days, retreated into my own head. On the 3rd day, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. She stood in my doorway, her hands on her hips, and said, "Don't you dare disappear on me, James. Not after everything." I confessed that I felt like a failure. She just shook her head. Well, I felt like a complete failure the day I signed my divorce papers, and yet here we are. Neither of us is broken. We're just rebuilding. She helped me rework my resume and put me in touch with a friend of hers who managed facilities for a local school district. I had a new job within 2 weeks. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, honest work that was mine. By the time autumn arrived, we had found our rhythm. Noah started 3rd grade. I found a new apartment, still my own, but only a 5-minute walk from their place. Some evenings, I'd cook dinner for them. On other nights, we'd take a walk to the bookstore just to browse the aisles and pretend we were sophisticated literary types. And somewhere in between the home-cooked meals, the spilled juice boxes, and the quiet nights on her saggy old couch, Emma's smile began to change. It wasn't the practiced, guarded one she used with customers anymore. The smile was softer, slower, and completely real. It was the smile of someone who had finally let her guard down and found that it was safe to do so. A month ago, I brought up the idea of us living together. There was no grand gesture, no ring hidden in a cupcake. It was just a quiet Saturday breakfast. She was spreading jam on a piece of toast for Noah. I took a breath and said, "What would you think about maybe finding a place together? The 3 of us." She didn't answer right away. She finished making the toast, placed it on a plate, and sat down at the table. Then she looked at me and said, "You are the first man I have ever trusted enough to even consider sharing a roof with again." A small pause, so yes, let's find a place. We didn't make a big deal about it. We just started looking. We found a 2-bedroom duplex on a quiet tree-lined street. It had a small backyard for Noah to tear around in and a kitchen with atrocious yellow tile. But she loved it, and so I did too. Today is our first morning in our new home. Noah is still sound asleep in his room. Emma is curled up on the new couch in one of my old hoodies, her feet tucked beneath her as she reads a book. The air smells like fresh paint and the cinnamon rolls she decided to bake. I sit down beside her and she leans into my side without a word. We don't need to say much anymore. We just know. After a few minutes of quiet, I say, Do you remember the first question I ever really asked you? She smiles without looking up from her book. In the parking lot, you asked if helping you was a bad idea. She closes her book, sets it aside, and turns her head to look at me, her eyes soft and clear. And I said, "Let's find out." I grin, feeling that same spark from all those months ago. I still feel the same way. She puts her hand on mine more than ever. I lean in and kiss her. It's different now. There's no nervousness, no uncertainty. It's just right. It's home. When we pull away, she whispers, "Thank you for being so patient. Thank you for waiting for me." I shake my head. You were never someone who needed fixing, Emma. I think I was the one who needed someone to believe I was worth showing up for. She holds my gaze, her love for me shining in her eyes. You were right from the very start. And that's how our story goes. Not with a dramatic climax or sweeping cinematic ending. No violins, no rooftop proposals. It's just the story of two people who refused to rush, who carried their scars and their past into something new and honest, who built a love like you build a house brick by brick, breath by breath. And now we live,